The hall was so beautiful that night that nobody expected the air to turn so strangely heavy. Guests were still laughing softly from the last toast when the music cut off, so suddenly, it felt like someone had pulled the plug on the entire world. The bride stood in the center holding a microphone, smiling in a way that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats, though no one dared say anything. Near the corner of the hall, a young pregnant maid stood with her hands pressed against her apron, trembling as if she knew something terrible was about to happen. Phones came up one by one, guests recording, whispering behind manicured fingers. And the groom, the millionaire who funded the entire ceremony, didn't move. He just stared, jaw tight, eyes filled with something hard to read. Regret, anger, or something he had been hiding for far too long. The bride raised her chin and pointed at the maid, telling her to come forward and sing so everyone could hear her voice, adding a comment that made even the photographer freeze mid-shot. The maid stepped toward the stage slowly, each step shaky, her breath uneven, as if walking into a moment she wasn't sure she would survive. What happened next was the moment that turned a wedding into a scandal the world would never forget. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Emma had only been working in that mansion for a little over 4 months, yet the household had already begun to shift around her presence. At 6 months pregnant, she moved carefully through every hallway, doing her best to avoid drawing attention to herself. She never raised her voice, never complained, and never forgot to thank the chef Antonio when he slipped extra fruit into her meal or told her to sit for a few minutes when her back began to ache. She came to the mansion under circumstances she rarely talked about, only that she needed a safe place and a steady income before the baby arrived. That was the part that mattered most to her, and anyone who observed her closely could tell she held on to her responsibilities like they were the last threads holding her life together. It made some of the staff protective, especially Antonio, who treated her less like an employee and more like a younger sister trying to stand on her own after a difficult chapter no one fully understood. Richard, the owner of the mansion and the man whose name carried weight in business circles across the state, always maintained a certain distance from his household staff. But there was something different about the way he acknowledged Emma. He spoke softly when addressing her, asked if she needed water on hot days, and even insisted she take shorter shifts when her pregnancy made tasks difficult. Most people described him as a reserved man, polite, generous, but emotionally unreadable. And yet, with Emma, there were moments when his expression shifted in ways that made the others wonder what history might exist beneath the surface. Some of the staff whispered that the boss had changed after Emma arrived, becoming quieter at dinner gatherings and more distracted during meetings held inside the mansion. Whether those whispers were fair or accurate, nobody could tell, but they floated through the hallways like fragments of a story no one had the full courage to say aloud. Vanessa, on the other hand, never hid a single feeling. She stepped into every room like it was a stage, and she was the main attraction, always dressed to impress, always prepared for someone's camera to turn her way. On social media, she portrayed herself as the ideal partner for a man of Richard's status, polished, glamorous, perfectly composed. But behind closed doors, her confidence turned sharp. She hated the way Emma walked through the mansion, hated the quiet sympathy that followed her, hated the way Richard softened whenever the maid entered the room. And the fact that Emma was pregnant only intensified her resentment. To Vanessa, the presence of a pregnant woman in her mansion felt like an insult, a stain on the picture-perfect life she had curated for herself. Her family had spent decades clawing their way into high society, and she believed that marrying Richard would finally cement her place among the elite. So when she sensed even the slightest threat to that image, even from someone as gentle and unassuming as a tired young maid, her anger grew quietly and steadily. What nobody realized, at least not yet, was how fragile the balance inside that household truly was. Emma needed this job more than anything else. Without it, she had no savings, no home, and no way to support the child she was preparing to bring into the world. Vanessa needed the wedding to succeed because it wasn't just about love. It was about proving to her family that she was worthy of the life she bragged about online. And Richard, though calm on the outside, carried something heavy beneath his silence, something connected to Emma that made him look away whenever questions got too personal. The tension stayed hidden, but it never disappeared. It lingered quietly through the dinners, the planning sessions, the late-night arguments behind closed doors, and every uneasy glance exchanged between the three of them. And as the wedding day approached, everyone seemed to sense that something important had been building, even if no one could name exactly what it was. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Vanessa's behavior toward Emma shifted from cold glances to subtle, cutting remarks slipped in whenever no guests were listening. She would walk past the maid and comment on how slowly she moved, or how her pregnancy made simple tasks look exaggerated, as if Emma were pretending to struggle for sympathy. Sometimes she would ask Emma to redo an already completed chore, only to smirk and say it still wasn't good enough. Emma kept her head down, reminding herself she needed the job, reminding herself that patience was the only way to survive until the baby arrived. But even Antonio began noticing that Emma flinched at the sound of Vanessa's heels approaching. The cruelty never exploded into anything dramatic. It showed up in tiny, humiliating ways that built like pressure in the walls of the mansion. And every time Richard appeared, the insults paused, leaving Emma torn between relief and confusion, unsure whether he understood what was happening behind the scenes or simply chose to ignore it. One afternoon, while delivering clean linens to Richard's home office, Emma accidentally knocked over a stack of folders on his desk. She bent down slowly to gather them, careful not to strain her back, when she noticed a sealed envelope that must have slipped free from the pile. Her hands froze when she saw her own name printed on the corner in bold, clean letters. Under it was the letterhead of a local medical clinic she had never visited. Before she could process what it meant, she heard footsteps and quickly slid the envelope back under the folders, standing up just as Richard walked into the room. He thanked her for the delivery, his tone gentle but distant. Emma nodded, but her mind raced as she left the office, feeling a strange mixture of fear and curiosity curling inside her. Why would Richard have a doctor's letter with her name on it? And why was it hidden beneath financial files and business documents? Vanessa, meanwhile, had begun watching Emma more closely, as if she could sense that something unsettled lay between her fiancé and the quiet maid. Whenever she caught Emma looking even slightly thoughtful, Vanessa accused her of eavesdropping or wandering where she didn't belong. She questioned staff members harshly about Emma's tasks, insisting she was too slow or too distracted for someone hired to maintain order. Her voice remained poised, but her words were sharp enough to make the other employees step carefully around her. One evening, Vanessa cornered Emma in the hallway with an icy smile, asking whether she had overheard any conversations she shouldn't have. Emma shook her head, frightened by the intensity in Vanessa's eyes. She tried to walk away, but the unsettling feeling lingered long after Vanessa dismissed her with a wave of the hand. It was the kind of suspicion that grows from insecurity, the kind that turns every small detail into fuel for imagined betrayal. A few days later, while Emma was gathering supplies in the pantry, one of the older staff members leaned in close enough that Emma could feel the warmth of her breath. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "Stay out of their business. This wedding is not what it looks like." Before Emma could ask anything, the woman stepped back and returned to work as if nothing had happened. Emma's heart pounded so hard she struggled to steady her breathing. She looked around, hoping someone else had heard it, but the hallway was empty. The warning echoed in her mind for the rest of the day, leaving her uneasy and unsure whom to trust. Every glance from the staff felt different now, like each person knew pieces of a story she wasn't allowed to understand. She wondered whether they were protecting her, or simply trying to protect themselves from something much bigger. That night, after finishing her shift, Emma returned to the small guest room the family had allowed her to use until her baby was born. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone, exhausted but grateful for a moment of quiet. Just as she set the phone down, a message appeared from an unknown number. The text was short, but it sent a chill through her entire body. It said, "Do not trust her. She is dangerous." There was no name, no explanation, and no follow-up message. Emma stared at the screen, unsure if the warning was about Vanessa or someone else entirely. She tried to reply, asking who it was, but the message failed to send. She checked the number again, only to realize it had already been disconnected or blocked. For the rest of the night, sleep refused to come. She felt watched, unsettled, and increasingly aware that the peaceful job she had hoped for was anything but safe. These moments raised difficult questions that Emma could no longer ignore. Why did Richard have her medical information? Why were members of the staff warning her about the wedding? What exactly was Vanessa hiding behind her polished smile? And why did the wedding planner, normally calm under pressure, look terrified whenever Vanessa entered the room? Emma could sense that many truths inside that mansion were being carefully covered, layer by layer, and she was becoming tangled in secrets she never asked to be a part of. The closer the wedding day came, the clearer it became that she had stepped into a world where every person had something at stake, something they were willing to protect, no matter the cost. Before the mansion, before the whispered warnings and cold glares, Emma's life had been a delicate balancing act between hope and heartbreak. She had always dreamed of singing professionally, spending hours alone in her tiny apartment with nothing but a second-hand microphone and a beaten-up keyboard, imagining herself on stage, lights warming her face as the audience leaned in, captivated. Music was her first love, the one thing that made the world feel alive despite everything else she carried. But life had other plans. Her ex, someone she had trusted deeply, abandoned her as soon as he learned she was pregnant. Promises of support evaporated overnight, leaving her with nothing but the weight of a child growing inside her and bills piling higher than she could manage. That pain, though raw, sharpened her resolve, reminding her that survival often required sacrifices most people could not imagine. She had applied for the maid position at Richard's mansion almost on impulse, responding to a job listing that promised stability more than glamour. The mansion seemed like a sanctuary, a place far removed from the chaos she had left behind. When Richard interviewed her, there was something in his gaze, a recognition, subtle but undeniable, that made Emma pause. It was as though he had seen herself reflected in her own vulnerability, understood without words the combination of resilience and quiet desperation she carried. She accepted the job without hesitation, grateful for a chance to catch her breath, to rebuild a life for herself and her unborn child. But as soon as she arrived, Vanessa noticed her. That first week, Vanessa's cold stares and pointed remarks began immediately. It was almost instinctual, the way some people react to what they perceive as a threat. Emma felt it, but said nothing, unwilling to provoke the woman who had so much to lose in her carefully curated world. She reminded herself that patience and discretion were the only tools she had, the only way to survive until her life became hers again. Yet despite her best efforts, the mansion was already changing her, stretching her resilience and forcing her to navigate hidden dangers she could not yet name. By the time she understood even a fraction of what lay ahead, it was too late. Emma had no idea she had already stepped into a landmine disguised as a mansion. Vanessa's jealousy had grown into something far more deliberate than Emma could have imagined. Small mistakes that previously would have gone unnoticed were suddenly magnified under her gaze. She would deliberately misplace cleaning supplies, criticize Emma's work with impossible standards, and instruct other staff members to withhold help, leaving Emma to struggle alone. Each action was calculated to make her falter, to test her patience and endurance. Emma's body ached from pregnancy, yet she pushed through, reminding herself that survival required perseverance. Every time she paused to breathe, Vanessa seemed to tighten her scrutiny, as though waiting for the moment Emma would break. The tension in the mansion thickened, and whispers among staff began, though none dared confront Vanessa directly. The cruelty escalated. Emma was forbidden from joining other staff members during meal breaks, leaving her to eat alone in a quiet corner, quietly suppressing tears of exhaustion. One afternoon, while carrying a tray, she became dizzy from standing too long and bending over too often. Vanessa, noticing her moment of weakness, simply smirked and told her to finish the task, adding a cruel remark about how fragile women should not be entrusted with responsibility. But the most terrifying moment came unexpectedly. Emma had been cleaning the study when she overheard a sharp clatter, the sound of glass hitting the floor. Vanessa had thrown a glass, narrowly missing Emma, after catching her speaking quietly with Antonio. The act was intentional, a display of control, a warning that even small defiance would not be tolerated. Later that night, as Emma rested quietly in her room, she replayed a phrase she had accidentally overheard Vanessa say in the study. words meant for no one but herself. If she ever opens her mouth, everything Richard and I built will collapse. Emma's heart raced as she realized that this was no longer about jealousy or competition. Vanessa feared something she did not yet understand, a truth Emma unknowingly carried. Why was Vanessa so terrified of her? What secret could threaten not just her marriage, but the empire they had constructed? And why had Vanessa singled her out, seemingly from the very first day? Those questions hung in the air, unanswered, leaving Emma aware that the mansion she thought was a sanctuary had become a place where danger and secrets were intertwined with every polished surface and gilded corner. Emma had spent months navigating the mansion carefully, but nothing prepared her for the discovery she stumbled upon that afternoon. While dusting Richard's study, a room she rarely entered, her hand brushed against a small, nondescript box tucked behind a row of books. Curiosity tugged at her despite the warning bells in her mind. Inside, she found items that made her pulse race. A DNA test, photographs of herself she didn't remember anyone taking, a hospital form with her name, and finally, a folded letter addressed specifically to her. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, eyes scanning the first line. If you're reading this, you deserve the truth. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a secret she had to know, a revelation that could change everything. Before she could absorb another word, the study door slammed open. Vanessa stormed in, her expression a mix of rage and panic. In a heartbeat, she seized the letter and ripped it into pieces, scattering the fragments across the polished floor. Emma tried to reach for the remains, but Vanessa shoved her backward, her voice low and dangerous. If you want to keep your job, and if you want that baby safe, stay out of my business. Emma's chest tightened, fear and anger mingling as she realized that the very moment she uncovered a hidden truth, Vanessa had made it clear. Her life inside the mansion, and the life of her unborn child, was now entirely at the mercy of a woman who would stop at nothing to protect whatever secret Richard and Vanessa shared. The rules had changed. Everything Emma thought she knew about safety and survival had been shattered. If you're still watching, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's following this insane story. Emma barely made it through the next day. The mansion's endless demands, combined with the lingering fear from Vanessa's threats, weighed heavily on her body. She nearly collapsed while carrying laundry up the grand staircase, her legs trembling beneath her and the baby kicking sharply as if echoing her own panic. Antonio, noticing her staggering, rushed to steady her, wrapping a supportive arm around her shoulder. "You need to slow down," he whispered, worry etched into his features. But before Emma could respond, Vanessa appeared, her face a mask of controlled fury. In a swift decision that shocked the staff, she ordered Antonio suspended temporarily, claiming he had overstepped his role. Emma's heart sank, not just for herself, but for the only person in that mansion who had consistently shown her kindness. Meanwhile, Richard observed the unfolding tension from across the room, his gaze lingering on Emma in ways that were impossible to ignore. He appeared restless, caught between duty, fear of Vanessa, and the concern he clearly felt for her. Every time Emma's eyes filled with tears, every time her exhaustion became visible, Richard's face tightened, his jaw clenched, and his fingers tapped nervously against the table. Staff whispered that the boss had never looked so conflicted. Vanessa, sensing this hesitation, leaned into it. She pressed Richard repeatedly, insisting that Emma needed to be removed before the wedding, warning that any delay could jeopardize everything they had built. Yet Richard resisted, however subtly, creating a tension that rippled through the mansion's halls. The unspoken question hung over everyone like a shadow. Why did Richard appear heartbroken whenever Emma cried? And what was he hiding that no one dared speak aloud? Emma felt it too, a connection she couldn't name, a sense that she was not entirely alone even in the midst of betrayal and fear. Finally, Richard asked Emma to meet him in the study, away from the constant scrutiny of Vanessa and the other staff. The room was quiet, but the weight of unspoken truths filled the air. Richard's eyes searched hers, hesitant yet determined, as if he had rehearsed this moment for weeks. "Emma," he began softly, "I need to tell you something. I knew your ex." The words hit her like a sudden storm. Her heart skipped, a mix of fear and disbelief. "I know who the father of your baby is," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. Emma's mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. Then he added, "Your ex, he's tied to something much bigger, something involving the Clark family." Emma's pulse quickened, the magnitude of his confession settling over her. She wanted to ask the questions flooding her mind, but Richard hesitated, as though a final truth lingered on the tip of his tongue. Before he could continue, Richard swallowed and said, "Emma, there's something I should have told you months ago." His words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. Just as the tension reached its peak, the study door swung open. Vanessa appeared, her presence abrupt and commanding, cutting through the fragile moment like a knife. Emma's chest tightened, realizing that once again, the one person she trusted to reveal the truth had been interrupted. The room filled with unspoken threats and unresolved secrets, leaving Emma and the viewers with a heart-stopping question. What was the final truth Richard had been holding back, and how far would Vanessa go to keep it hidden? The wedding day arrived with a level of grandeur that made the mansion feel like a palace. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting reflections on polished floors, while photographers moved from corner to corner, capturing every carefully staged moment. Guests in designer gowns whispered behind gloved hands, cameras flashing as the event unfolded. Amid all this, Emma worked tirelessly, her body aching from exhaustion, her hands trembling as she carried trays and adjusted decorations, aware that any misstep could draw Vanessa's wrath. And Vanessa, as if feeding on the tension, lingered nearby, her gaze fixed on Emma with a cruel delight, eyes glinting whenever the maid faltered. Richard stood at a distance, suit impeccably tailored, face composed, but every so often his eyes betrayed a storm of emotion, conflicted, silent, uncertain. He watched Emma navigate the chaos with care and quiet dignity, and though he remained mute, the air between them was heavy with unspoken truths, guilt, and questions that could no longer be ignored. The bride's voice cut through the hall like a command, calling Emma onto the stage. Phones rose, cameras flashing as every guest leaned forward, curiosity and amusement mixing in the air. Emma's legs trembled, her hands clutching the microphone as she stepped into the spotlight. Her voice was shaky at first, each note carrying the weight of humiliation, exhaustion, and years of hidden pain. Richard stood frozen near the edge of the room, eyes fixed on her, jaw tight, unsure how to act as his fiancée's cruelty played out publicly. The hall was silent except for the faint hum of Emma's voice, drawing the audience in, holding them captive without even realizing why. Then, in a moment no one expected, Richard moved. He strode onto the stage, stopping the music mid-note, grabbing the microphone with authority that silenced the whispers instantly. The truth spilled from his lips, unwavering. Emma wasn't just the maid, and the man who abandoned her was not her baby's father. Richard revealed, with a calm yet urgent tone, that he himself was the father, a secret from years ago, long before Vanessa had entered his life, a truth he had only recently uncovered. Vanessa's face crumpled in rage, disbelief written across her features. Gasps filled the room, staff froze, and even the wedding planner, who had quietly known, could no longer hold back tears. The mansion erupted in chaos, yet in the center, Emma fainted, and Richard caught her, steadying her as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. In the aftermath, the wedding was immediately canceled. Richard publicly defended Emma, exposing Vanessa for her deception and cruelty. Emma's baby was safe, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of justice and relief wash over her. Vanessa faced the consequences of her actions, stripped of the image she had so carefully built. And as calm returned, Emma lifted the microphone once more, this time singing for herself, her voice strong, free, and beautiful, no longer silenced by fear or shame. Do you think Richard did the right thing? And what do you believe Vanessa was truly afraid of? If this story hit you like it did us, tap the like button and subscribe for more gripping stories every day.